Welcome to the G5 Hive and our next installment of our Worker Bee series, where we deep dive into the G5 college football landscape with the folks that know the teams the best. If you're watching us on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe button. If you are listening to us in podcast form, please rate and review. Today, we'll be taking a look at the Ohio Bobcats, who finished 10-3 in 2023 and capped off their season with a win over Georgia Southern Eagles in the Myrtle Beach Bowl. They wrapped up their 2024 spring practice with their spring game on April 20th. We have a special guest joining us today. He was born and raised in the suburbs of Chicago. He is the voice of the Ohio Bobcats. He is Russ Eisenstein. Russ can be found at Russ Eisenstein on X. Welcome to the show, Russ.
What's up, boys? How are we?
We are great. We are ready to talk about football. Football's right around the corner. Bring on football season.
Absolutely. Exciting time for sure across the country. Exciting here in Southeast Ohio, too. This program is on a solid foundation from Frank Solich now to Tim Albin, and we'll see what the Bobcats can do here in 2024.
Well, let's move over to that defensive side of the ball. There'll be a new defensive coordinator here in 2024. Nowitzki's off to Memphis to be the D-line coach, but the new DC is John Hauser. He was the safeties coach for Ohio last year. Is it safe to see that we're going to see him stick with this 4-3 defense here in 2024, or what are your expectations?
Absolutely. And I think the amazing thing about what Ohio did last season was the development of these players in this program. You know, Bryce Houston and Keith Thompson were linebackers that anybody on any level would want to have in their program, not only on the field, but how they represented this program in the classroom, in the community, and through national interviews or whatever else. They are who this program is, and there will be more Bryce Houstons and Keith Thompson. Bryce Houston is going to be the CEO of a Fortune 500 company at some point in his business life. I guarantee you that. I mean, he didn't need football to have success. He just loves football so much, and he was so good at it that he just kept on playing. And Keith Thompson at Pitt, to be able to move on to the next level, there will be others for sure, and we'll talk about the candidates. And John Hauser and Spence Nowinski worked together at Miami. John Hauser has ties to Joe Novak and Northern Illinois and the program there. And I mentioned Coach Novak because he built that NIU program into what it is now. And Coach Hauser was a part of that moving forward too. And so this guy comes in with a really good mindset and a really good idea of how to run a defense. And yes, Spence Nowinski deserves that opportunity at Memphis and what he did at Miami. But John Hauser needs to have mention here about what he was able to do to move the parts around in that system. And that was a dominant D. That was one of the best D. And I followed MAC football my whole life. And there are some teams that you could point to and say, gosh, you know, that 0-3 defense at NIU, maybe some others, Western Michigan in 16. But that defense last year was one of the best MAC defenses ever, bar none, period. And Ohio had the only shutout in bowl history in the MAC, 2018 in the Frisco Bowl. Well, 27-0, Ohio beat San Diego State. So anybody that had a part of this defensive system last year deserves a great deal of credit. John Hauser deserves a great deal of credit. I'm excited to see what he can do with restocking what Ohio's been able to do, even with the transfer portal.
Well, let's talk about some of the positions that are going to make up that defense for Coach Hauser. And go over the defensive line. They lost a lot of production to graduation, but they do return Bradley Weaver, who had a team-leading 6 sacks and 13 tackles for loss last season. What can you tell us about this defensive line as we head into fall camp?
Yeah, there are guys, as we talk about, in every level of this defense that have produced. You know, Bradley Weaver is just a beast. I mean, he can hit, he could wrap up. He's very well schooled, has a really, really good mind for the game. And so he is, just like a lot of the others that we've had here, just really, really, really good, fundamentally sound. You know, Tremaine Scott on Ohio's coaching staff was a player here that made big-time plays in the early 2010s. He was a part of the win in the Independence Bowl over Louisiana Monroe in 2012, right? So he has buy-in to this program. And so he's been able to coach guys up like a Bradley Weaver. And then you move back to the linebackers in the secondary, and we'll talk about that. But Bradley Weaver is a guy that has an all-MAC sort of ability about him, and I'm looking forward to seeing what he could do this year.
Well, let's look at that linebacking group. They lost their top 2 tacklers from a year ago. Both made the all-MAC first-team defense last year. You mentioned them earlier, Bryce Houston, Key Thompson. They've both graduated, or Bryce Houston, he graduated, Key Thompson off to Pitt. Shea Taylor returns with the most game experience from a year ago. They also bring in Blake Leak from Bucknell and Reese Collier from UAB. He joins the team after the spring. How did the linebacking group look in the spring, and what should we expect from this group going into 2024?
Yeah, I love Shea Taylor. First off, he's a hard hitter. He's a ball hawk as a linebacker. He's always around it. And if you take a look at his performance last season in the bowl game, he just jumps off the tape, right? And the theme here is talking about the pedigree of this program. And that linebacker room has been consistent over the years. The production, the skill sets, the mind for the game, all of it. So yes, that's a big loss when you lose Bryce Houston and Keith Thompson. But they were developed in this system. And I think Shea Taylor has every ability to be one of the best linebackers on this level of college football this year. I excited about what he can do. And when I talk about this defense, I get goosebumps talking about it because I know all the work that they put in, all the success that they put in, and all of the work that this coaching staff was able to instill in them, the knowledge of the game. And I think the next step is for Shea and whoever else is around him. The linebackers, they set the tone last year. I think the strength from a veteran nature is in the secondary, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But when you have a stud like Shea there in the middle, I think that's a pretty good piece to build around.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that's, when we were preparing for this interview, the thing that stuck out to me the most is, you have 3 guys that really kind of, broke out in the bowl game with Parker, Ricky, and Shea. And I don't know, that's just pretty cool to see as heading into the new season.
Absolutely, for sure.
So moving over to that defensive backfield, they lose the likes of Walter Reynolds, Torrey Cox Jr., and Justin Burchett. Cox is off to Illinois while the others graduated. They do bring back a fair amount of guys with game experience like Austin Brawley, Adonis Williams Jr., Jeremiah Wood, Roman Parody, and Tank Pearson. Yeah. What should we expect from this group here in 2024?
They all can make plays. I mean, they're a really fun group to be around and to watch. And yeah, to your point, there were names that moved on, but that's the most veteran part of this team, really, from a position group. If we're talking about the DBs, if we're talking about the secondary, Roman Parodi is from the Miami area. It was really cool that Ohio played FAU in back-to-back seasons, and he wanted to have a big game against FAU, and he produced. So Ohio, when we talk about recruiting, is Ohio a type of program that can recruit in South Florida? Boom, you mentioned Torrey Cox, and he's moved on, and we wish him great success as well. But Roman Parodi stayed around, and he can make plays. He had a pick 6 against Bowling Green last year. That was a game that it felt like Ohio won like 100-0 in that game. It was done in the first half, and Bowling Green went on to have a great year. And so that adds to, the weight of what Ohio was able to do on homecoming, no less, at BG. So that was really fun. But the secondary, you mentioned Austin Brawley, and I know you'll have a conversation with him, but he's a guy from Massillon. You talk about a legendary high school program and a guy that expects to win. We talked, he and I last year, Ohio had a turnover belt last year. He said, that's my belt. I go into every game. And it wasn't about arrogance. He said that belt belongs to me. I'm going to have a turnover caused and a pickup in every game. He wanted to anyway. And he had to battle through injury too. So that moxie, that confidence from the high school program to here. And then Jeremiah Wood. Jeremiah Wood is almost as old as I am. I mean, he came in here in 2018. That's pre-pandemic, right? And so he's an engineering major. He's really, really smart. He represented the program with Parker at Mac Media Day. And I'm excited to see him in his final season. He's excited too. And so the strength of this defense has moved to the backside now in the secondary, and they can cause turnovers. And when Ohio's had success, they have had big time plus when it comes to turnover ratio. They had it last year, one of the best defense in the country, and that's going to continue this year. And they're good enough and they're deep enough that they could gamble and make plays. They did last season, and I think in the secondary, they could do that again this year.
All right, Russ. Well, we asked you on the offensive side who your breakout was. So let's move it over to that defensive side. Who is your breakout performer here in 2024?
Yeah, to build on it and the conversation that we had there, I had two guys, right? Austin Browley, as we talked about, Shea Taylor, another, because you've got signs of what they were able to put on tape and show you in games last season. Now, hopefully it's a year of full health. And again, that's what everybody talks about, right? Can these guys have the health luck? And sometimes you get bad luck. And Austin had to battle through some injuries last season, and Shea Taylor, give him a whole year. And so there's enough to build on from last season, bowl game and other work throughout the year. I'm excited to see what those two can do, because I think they both can be all MAC performers this season.
All right. If you're watching us on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe button. And if you're listening to us in podcast form, please leave a rate and review on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Thank you for all your support. And until the next time, we are the G5 Hive.